Hi everyone, I'm going to start in about 2.5 minutes. I'd love to hear where you're from. Just drop it in the comments. Hi everybody, starting in about 1.5 minutes. Love to hear where you're from. Drop it in the comments. If someone can just let me know you can hear me, it's also nice as well. Thank you. Starting in 30 seconds. Well, good evening, everyone. And if you're watching this on the rebroadcast, good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for joining me tonight for a presentation I have called The Porn Project. If this is your first of I'm actually been going through every 2 weeks since the first week in January, one of my talks. But if this is your first time here, my name is Brett Ullman. I actually live in a town called Ajax. I'm about 45 minutes east of the city of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. My background is education. I was a teacher for almost 10 years with the Toronto District School Board. And 15, if not 16 years ago, I left my teaching job to do this. And this is my full-time job. Now, I would usually say I travel and speak, hopefully with vaccines and other things. I can get back to that, but doing a lot more of Zoom, eCam, which is what I'm using tonight, and others. I have about 6 or 7 talks that I do. The biggest talk that I do is my 2 talks on mental health and my talk on parenting called Navigating Everything. This is actually the order I did these as well. I then have a talk on media, and I have a new talk for men called Men Navigating Everything. And then there's a couple more we're going to do. This is my talk on pornography, and in 2 weeks from now, we're doing my talk on dating. I'm going to switch to this mode for the rest of the night where you can see my presentation beside me. First off, I would just say thank you for joining me. I know this is an interesting topic and one what I find is people don't want to come to this talk because people think they are therefore struggling with this conversation. And the truth is, you might, but I find it's one of those topics that we need to talk about. It was Leo Tolstoy who said a long time ago, in the name of God, stop what you're doing, cease your work, and look around you. I mean, tonight we're just going to take a pause from whatever we're doing and look at this conversation on pornography. So I have a fear with this talk that I don't with my other talks. And my greatest fear is to break broken people. Meaning, whether you're watching this live or on YouTube in the upcoming weeks or months, my greatest fear is to take someone who's already hurting, who's already addicted to pornography, and then somehow with the language, with the words, with what I say, to break you even more. So here's my dilemma. How do I have a conversation on a topic that, has made you feel broken without breaking you even more? And all I can do is this. I can say we can address tonight in two different contexts. One is in the context of a loving and a forgiving God, and two is in the context of a loving and a forgiving community. I find myself often saying to churches, we need to show the grace and mercy, whether it's mental health, whether it's parenting struggles, addictions, or tonight looking at the idea of pornography. Now, there's a great prayer of conviction and cleansing I found online. I'll just begin with this. Holy Father, you are the one and only Holy Father in heaven and earth. I humble myself and confess that I need your help to walk holy in this life that you've given me. Thank you for the Holy Spirit's conviction and correction that you have freely bestowed to those who believe in Jesus as their Savior from our sins. I pray the Holy Spirit in mercy would convict me of any sin or bad habit that's in my life. And if you want a verse for the evening, it would just be Psalm 51:10. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. So one thing I've tried to do sometimes with my talks is to put them into one line. And this would be the one line for tonight. Stop looking at porn. But that is so much easier said than it is done. And I think sometimes in our Christian culture, we oversimplify tougher conversations. So why would I even have this conversation? It's because of I've been speaking full-time for 16 years and probably 9 more years or so beyond that. 9, 8. The thousands and thousands of conversations with people where pornography, the destruction in marriage, the losing jobs due to addiction, that's why this is a conversation. We need to look at meeting people where they're at, and this is where a lot of people are at tonight. So there's a current state of culture. And this quote says that arguably, there's never been a more confusing, stressful time to be a teenager, and I would say, or adult, with so much information available and so little education on the topic of creating a Christian sexual ethic. How were you taught about pornography? How do you connect your ancient faith with your modern world with a conversation like pornography? It was Benjamin Franklin who said, "Tell me and I'll forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will learn." And so there's going to be, this isn't just hopefully you watching me, it's hopefully equipping you and empowering you and supporting you in this journey that you have. I keep saying you, right? This is almost like a training for you tonight. So some ground rules. The first would be to have opinions. And I often say this, I would rather you have a different opinion than me than have no opinion at all. Opinions are good. The Bible says iron sharpens iron, but it takes iron to sharpen iron, right? Have good, thought out, critical thinkers, right? We need to do this, and then we can sharpen each other. Number two, we need to look at how we learn, and whether you take notes tonight or whether you write things down, it doesn't matter. You could take a photo of this. I usually say if I'm in a church or a conference, but you could just actually replay this later. The rope that's being frayed, I want to tonight be this. I want to be incredibly biblical, but utterly practical. And those words cannot be oxymorons. It has to be both. We have to look at connecting our Sundays with our Mondays, and then our Tuesdays, and the list goes on. It will be a toolbox. There is no one answer to mental health. I say that the same for mental health, but there's no one answer to pornography, and you're not going to hear me say tonight there is only one answer, because it's just not true. Now, it might have been true for you, meaning there are people who do a single thing and find hope and healing, but it doesn't mean that that's the same way for everyone else. And if that's all you had to do, that's a great thing for you. And it will just start with you. I also make some assumptions that some of you who are watching might be journeying with this. I assume some of you might be addicted, and we're going to talk about addiction tonight, because some people who are addicted want to break free, some do not. The blank picture frames, there are no images, no pictures. There's no graphics tonight. I mean, even when I look at what I used to do 20 years ago, we would look at a Playboy cover from 20 years ago and a Playboy cover now. And the truth is, I don't need to show anything. We all know the world we live in. I really want to look at, we know the world is pornified. How do we move forward? If you are a parent, or if you're a student today, I would say too, you're the first generation ever who's been born with, we're just going to say, porn in your pocket. Meaning your phone, right? This is literally pornography in your pocket. Whereas I'm 49, in my day, it was very, very different. And for any of the women who are watching, tonight's conversation, most of the statistics all talk about men. This is not just a male conversation. Many, many women struggle. But the books, if they say he, I just assume it's going to be he or she, right? Just assume it's for either person. Now, this is a process, not an event. And I do say, unless you get miraculously healed, there are people, again, who pray and are healed of these things, and many who are not. And I always say, it says a lot of us as people in the church with people who pray and do not get healed. What do we do with them? We don't blame them, right? We walk alongside them. But wholeness, restoration, forgiveness, freedom will look different for all of you. But you are responsible for yourself and for finding your own path to healing. And on the other side of that coin, you are more than your struggle, right? You're so much more than just this journey. Now, I began reading a book recently. This only came out yesterday. And as a side note, every book I promote tonight, all of them are on a new Amazon page. On every topic I speak on, they're on one link, and I'll give it to you at the end. It's also in the bottom of every YouTube video, I think including this one. I might not have been able to put it in until after I'm done. But Sheila Ray Gregoire, in her new book, The Great Sex Rescue, says, and she's talking about this ideology in our church world where women are blamed, and they say, like, without sex, he'll watch porn. And basically they tell men, like, you need her, your wife, to be your methadone, like coming off a drug. And I like when she says, you don't build a great sex life by telling women that unless she becomes wholly available to her husband in such a vulnerable way that he will betray her by turning to pornography. Let's just call a spade what it is. This is what she's saying is truth. And the other ideology is absolute stupidity. And I hear it in the Christian culture. This idea that women have to, like, right, sex is about men and women just have to provide. And so many books kind of walk through this dysfunction. I would highly encourage you to read this. A book that's disturbing and that it's challenging some of the structures and some of the books that we call mainstays in our Christian culture. There's a quote by Alan, I think it's Alan Watts, and it talks about how, like, I'm under no obligation to be who I was 5 minutes ago. And I stand by that in my own life, that there are books that I used to promote that I don't anymore. And when a book like this challenges me, I'll look at and kind of critique what I promote and what I do as well. Now, I do think we need to change our paradigm in our church Christian community, which is what I live in. Whether it's children, elementary school kids, teenagers, young adults, or adults, our paradigm is very dysfunctional. Often, or almost always, it's this. When kids are young, they are talked about very little about conversations and sexuality. I read a stat that says even kids on online conversations, which is humongous, are talked about in their entire life. Less than 50 minutes of a conversation on how to have good education with that. Sex, we rarely talk about it. Kids get into high school, and if they attend youth group, there are some sessions with that. Young adults, there's a few, but there's very few young adults groups. Then we get married, which is when in our Christian culture we'd say, now you're free to be sexually active in marriage. And then we never talk about it again. Never, for the most part. And there are some churches that address this, but we need to look at addressing how do we have good, healthy, rich sex lives in our marriages. And this should be the common and not the uncommon. There's a book by Dan Heath called Upstream, probably one of my favorite books this year. You'll find it on this page on Amazon I give you at the end in the habits section. But it's about, like, before we're addicted to porn, how do we talk about good sex education, helping people not have that happen? Before our marriages disintegrate, how do we create good marriages? And I love this idea of looking upstream. So just some quick conversations on this. Is porn a sin? Now, the use of the word sin as opposed to these alternate terms kind of put it in the realm of theology, but it's also wrong in every other way you can see below there. And what I see a lot of is the unhealthy in the addiction standpoint and a lot of the destruction. If you talk to church leaders, pastors, lay leaders, and others, even I just say talk to many people. They will all be able to tell you a lot of this destruction we've seen. I can't tell you how many guys I know who've lost their marriages due to porn addiction and other things, finances, you name it. John Stott once said, sin and the child of God are incompatible. They may occasionally meet, but they cannot live together in harmony. It's the idea of I cannot stop, and I would say that's probably self-deception. One of my favorite books, and this is in that Amazon page, Sexual Detox by Tim Challies, he says that the issue of pornography is spoken about so often in Christian circles that it's in danger of becoming cliche. Now, here's where I would challenge this. I don't think it's spoken about that much. I think we might say the word pornography, but I don't think we actually equip you and talk about pornography. And I agree, though, where he says, but the actual human dangers, physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual, are realities we must not avoid or overlook. For many of you, it's the never again, right, insanity. We do the same thing over and over, but expect a different result. We say we're never going to look again, and then a day goes by, then we look, and then we say we're never going to look again, and we, again, get on our knees and pray for forgiveness. It's just this never-ending cycle. So how do you stop? Think of those, like, the falling down dominoes. How do we actually stop? I was up at where was I? I think I was up at a camp called Muskoka Woods when someone said this, the idea that you're given, here's how change comes. You're given a vision of the future that's just so amazing that that's what you want. Or you hit rock bottom. And I think we need to be there, especially as the church, to challenge you for a better future, but also to be there when you hit rock bottom. It was a number of years ago. I'm on a flight, which just sounds weird to say, as I haven't been on a flight in 11 months. But I'm watching the movie Battleship by Liam Neeson. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like Liam, so Liam says, so there's aliens that have landed on the ocean, and Liam says, prepare to fire. And this random guy's like, sir, which weapons? And Liam pauses and says, all of them. And it was awesome. This kind of image I took of a screenshot of the movie, like everything fires off of this battleship. That's not what I see in the church world today. I do not see the urgency. I don't see a lot of battle in this conversation. When I have spoken this on Sunday mornings, which is very unorthodox, but even for a church, many people say we've never in our lives had a conversation on pornography. Bruce Barton, in his book The Good Old World, says what a curious phenomenon it is that you can get men to die for the liberty of the world, but they will not make a little sacrifice that's needed to free themselves from their own individual bondage. So tonight, it's about an hour tonight. I know I've already gone in almost 20 minutes. I might be a bit over. I'm just going to relax and talk. So here's what we do. Beliefs, behaviors beyond you. I'm sorry they're all B's. They just happen to be. What is porn? Stats, theology, addiction, accountability, lifestyle, environment, and then beyond you. Just looking that it's beyond just us, and how do we address some of these things. So porn defined, I like the top definition, that it's anything that's designed to make you respond sexually. So it could be you're checking out of if you're in the US, like I was going to say CV, whatever the pharmacies are, Canada, like Rexall Pharmacy, Shoppers Drug Mart, and you see a magazine, I consider some of them porn. Most of us, though, would say tonight, internet pornography, we would agree, but then it goes on from there. Online chatting, sexting, and then greater sexual deviances, things like strip joints, massage parlors, escorts, one-night stands, a list goes on. I believe in what's called a Christian sexual ethic. It's like this overarching umbrella for our sex life under this Christian construct, and we can call it a biblical worldview. It was Russell Brand who once said, porn is icebergs of filth floating through every house on Wi-Fi. Russell comes across as a buffoon in a lot of his comedy, but he's actually a very, very brilliant guy. So let's deal with beliefs. First off, there is a history of pornography, and it's changed in my life. I remember when it was print magazines at a convenience store, small amounts of magazines, small amounts of films, and a small amount of adult bookstores. Today, bookstores are normal, and this is not in the 1950s, but I was speaking a number of years ago. I think it was in Peterborough, and I spoke at this Christian school, and then I headed out for lunch. And so I did what I'm not supposed to do. I got out of my car, and there's a Subway, and I got up, and I kind of was on my phone, and I opened the door, And I walked in, there was really weird music, and I looked around, and I'm in the adult bookstore, which is literally like there's two doors. One goes to Subway, one to the adult bookstore. And the guy says, Subway? I'm like, yeah. He goes, that's next door. So I open the door to go out, and the entire staff of the Christian school are walking to Subway for lunch. Now, I'm a speaker. I don't often have nothing to say, but in that moment, my face must have just drained with blood. And they said, Brett, we watched you walk in and walk out. But I'm like, anyways, adult bookstores. VCR, some of you remember that. The fuzzy cable porn channels, which some of us used to watch years ago. Then it was more on demand. Then it was dial-up internet, which was a joke. Remember, it would load one line at a time. And today we have like what we're doing now. High-speed streaming. I can stream at 4K. Like there's just incredible things we do today. So, and this changed things like streaming, live chatting, movies, child pornography. Someone once said it grew 1,000%. And then I was challenged after one of my talks for someone who works in this kind of protection industry and child pornography and sex trafficking. She says, we think it's actually a lot higher than that. And then porn addiction as well. And what's changed with high-speed internet is porn is now anonymous. It's now affordable, free, most of it, and it's now accessible. And not just accessible to us, but accessible to younger and younger kids, which is scary. So we got a grant a number of years ago, and we polled, I don't remember how many thousands of people, but this is what some of the answers were. And this was across denominations. There was no difference between Baptist and Pentecostal and Presbyterian. Like it was just the same, Catholic, the list goes on. So don't watch pornography, 40%, which means 60% of these are professing Christians actually talked about like a few times a month, 12, daily 5, monthly 12, weekly 21, and yearly 10. Like these are big statistics. Again, we need to meet people where they are at. And this is today one of those sins. Remember, who you really are is who you are behind closed doors. It's not who, like if you were in a room with me tonight, it's not who you are in that environment. Who you are is who you are when we're done tonight and you turn this off. Where do you go when you're alone? When I go to a hotel and I close the door, what do I watch? What do I do? Do you think you have an addiction to porn? No, 71. I don't know 7. And yes, these are Christians. 21% of the people polled, they believe they have an addiction. This one scares me. Would you feel comfortable approaching any member of your current church leadership for support? It's basically 50-50. Like, 45% of people would not approach you if you're a Christian church leader tonight and say, I'm struggling with pornography. Like, there is a disconnect here between, right, like clergy and then the regular congregation, if that's the case. And did your parents ever openly talk about pornography in your home? Yes, 10%. 31, they mentioned it, but never really, which is kind of what we do today. And when I talk to parents, again, we need to address this. And kind of like Home Depot's motto, you can do it, we can help. You might need some support. And there's great books and good conversations. I know many people bring kids, when I say kids, grade 6, 7, or 8, or high school out to this talk. And then they go out for dinner and have a conversation around this. Statistics, this is Covenant Eyes, who would be, I would say, one of the leaders in this kind of wheelhouse. 50 to 60% of Christian men and 1 out of 5 Christian women say that they're addicted to pornography. Like, let the weight of that sink in for 1 second. 1 out of 5 women and like 5 or 6 out of 10 men. And then the question is, what is addiction, right? Are you a dabbler in this, a struggler, or addicted? There's kind of this kind of, to quote Mercy Me or Casting Crowds, it was a slow fade into the addiction. Tim Challies wrote a great article called Pornolescence, and each of these articles you can find on my website in the sex and porn part of the blog. Pornolescence is that period where a person is old enough and mature enough to know that pornography is wrong and that it exacts a heavy price, but too immature or too apathetic to do anything about it. Is that not the reality? I think some of us love our sin, right? It's too good to change, but I think we need to. So, like my talk on mental health, there are many ways people get into mental health and mental illness journeys and many ways out. It's the exact same with pornography. Now, I'm going to begin with theology because I think it's important, but I am not saying that the answer to pornography is just your faith in Jesus, even though your faith in Jesus is a foundation in these journeys. So let me walk through. First off, I think I would say with theology, how do I have this conversation? Like, I kind of really want to ask this. How many times this week did you have any meaningful times of engagement with Jesus? Meaning, if you haven't read your Bible all week and haven't prayed all week, but then I'm going to tell you what the Bible says of why you shouldn't look at porn, the Bible doesn't really mean anything to you. So why would you, this is why theology conversations matter, but to people who the Bible matters. Larry Crabb, who actually passed away, I think it was yesterday, says, because we focus more on our longings than our evil, we see ourselves not as hopelessly arrogant, worth of eternal misery, but as scoldably selfish, deserving perhaps a slap on the wrist. I don't know if we fear God in our Western culture anymore. Tim Conway once said, it's very difficult when you come out off your knees or out of your prayer closet after you are looking at the Word of God, and you've been staggered by the holiness, by the awesomeness, by the bigness of the mighty hand of God. He says you don't do that and suddenly look at pornography. Some statistics talk about Christians. We said this in my talk on media a few weeks ago. Upwards of 90%, some stats say, don't even read their Bible week to week. Now, we could spend all night looking at, even just looking at the book of Corinthians and walking through what the word porneia is and it's not, and we can debate it. But the context of all these letters is the same, that we as believers are not to conform to the cultural norms that the church found itself confronted with in that day. Now, our day might be different, but we are not to conform to the norms of the day with things like pornography. Now, when I began to put this talk together, I'm like, what stories would I use that would challenge you? Samson, Joseph, Potiphar's wife, David, Bathsheba, and I'm like, I'm just going to put them all up there. And like Philippians, how about the most basic thing of do what is noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, and the list goes on. We have verses in repentance, like repent and turn to God. We have verse after verse on purity. Create in me a pure heart, O God. The renewing of your mind in Romans. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We need this ongoing renewing. The running and fleeing from sexual morality. How about the Job 31? I've made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. We could take an entire evening on each of these. But this is what I see. James 1:15, death. And when lust is conceived, it brings forth sin, and sin, when it's finished, brings death. Sin is death. Porn is death. Death of marriages. Death of relationships. Death of, the translations might differ, but the context is the same. This leads to something bad. And there is a spiritual warfare component to this. Now, we either do this too much or too little. It's often we don't find a good middle ground. But Ephesians 6:12 is in the Bible, and you can't just throw it out. The book The Bondage Breaker and Clayton Arnold's 3 Crucial Questions about Spiritual Warfare, I think, are really good conversations here. And here it says there is a soul and there is an internal battle with very real forces. It says in Ephesians 4:27, don't let the sun go down on you while you're still angry, for anger gives a mighty foothold to the devil. Well, that's just anger. This does as well. Now, there's a really interesting article I read by Rick Warren a number of years ago. He says, let me explain it this way. On D-Day, the Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. It was critical that they establish a beachhead, that is a foothold on the beach that would allow them to set up a staging area to bring in more men and equipment for the battle. Think of the movie Saving Private Ryan, the first 11 minutes. But from that tiny foothold, the Allied forces were able to push inland in an effort to liberate France. But he goes on to say, but Satan isn't trying to liberate you. He wants to establish a foothold in your life, to take over more and more of your life, and that foothold in time becomes a stronghold. It makes it harder for you to take it back. And the Bible talks about giving Satan a foothold. There are dozens of ways you can do this. Porn is one. It says in the book Clean, sin will find you out. We have all seen great men, and I add in, and women of God excelling in the Lord and moving towards global impact, only to succumb to sexual sin. Suddenly, all you can do is watch as their ministries, families, and reputations crumble in shame. Whether recently it's Carl Lenz or Ravi Zacharias, and the list goes on, it's just an ongoing kind of barrage of people who are journeying and struggling with this. We know more kind of the quote-unquote celebrity pastors who fall, but there are many, many regular people like you and me who struggle with this, and it hurts as well. So how are you training? I coached rep baseball. It was my last year a couple of years ago before my son stopped and ended up working at a camp all summer, as a side note. But I think training, like I trained my baseball players, there's training in our faith. And I think Christianity is a strategic daily pursuit. And spiritual disciplines are how you do this. And I have a whole list of my favorite spiritual disciplines book I'll give you later. Prayer, fasting, study, solitude, money, communion, evangelism, all of these things are this foundation from which we build from. And then I think we're better off in our temptation when our faith is good. So I want you to be spiritually strong, but I also want you to be physically strong and emotionally strong, right? And so in my mental health talk, I talk a lot about these physical disciplines, things like exercise and sleep and diet. I want us to be healthy again. This is the first part in my mental health talk. I talk about body, mind, and soul. We want all of those things to be healthy and vibrant. So we move from, the first part to behaviors. And behaviors, and I added this in this morning as well, the addiction is the big conversation. And I read, I think it was about a year ago, Gabor Mate's book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Gabor was from Vancouver, East Van, if you know, incredible drug use. And he talks about, in his Close Encounters with Addiction, how trauma plays such an incredible role. And trauma does set us up for failure, and we must deal with trauma. And so there are some reasons we get into addiction, but I would just say this is a really good book. In another book, Wired for Intimacy, but calls to pray harder, move the computer to the living room, and get plugged into an accountability group only go so far. They come across as hollow to the many men, I add, and women whose brains have been altered and rewired by their experiences with pornography. Breaking free from your addiction. Now, you could debate with me whether this is called an addiction or a compulsion. I believe it's video game compulsion, but I would actually believe in sex addiction and porn addiction here. Now, I updated this morning as well. What's interesting to me is one of the largest groups in the world trying to break people free from pornography is not Christian culture. It's actually 20-something non-Christian guys. This, if you don't know the symbol, this is Reddit, the forum online. This is called NoFap. It's kind of a slang term for no masturbation. They actually call themselves Fapstronauts, which is really funny. They're this kind of astronaut floating away. But they have 774,000 members. Your Brain on Porn, he did one of a massive, Gary Wilson, I think his name is. He did an amazing TED Talk, 20,000 unique visitors per day looking for some freedom from porn. So coming from a non-faith-based worldview, sleeping with your girlfriend would be fine. These guys in their 20s have, through a life of high-speed internet pornography, novelty, different person, video. Then they're with one person, and they're finding they're getting erectile dysfunction. Maclean's Magazine years ago said it's 1 in 3 college-age men. Non-faith-based study, non-faith-based article, 1 in 3 men today. Many of the counselors I speak to say that porn-induced erectile dysfunction is a big deal in society today. It starts with lower reactions to porn, and then there's a general drop in libido, and then in the end it becomes impossible to get an erection. Yes, we're talking from a male perspective here, but this is a big deal. I would encourage you to do a reboot, and some of you might think of Joe Cross and his juicing, not what I'm talking about. It's looking at 90 days of trying to reboot your brain, meaning for 90 days, don't put anything that's sexual into your life. No magazines, movies, social media might have to get rid of, no internet pornography, the list goes on. You're what's that line? It says neurons that wire together, fire together, neurons that wire apart, fire apart, meaning the neuroplasty, as we call it in the brain, your brain can change for addiction and it can change to get better. And the number of people who I've encouraged to do this, and people have come back and said it's been life-changing because they've realized how sexualized everything that we put into our lives is. So in behaviors, we now look at accountability. And accountability should be an already existing dynamic in friendship that flows naturally from looking out for each other's best interests. Now, accountability, I find, is what many people think of as a joke, and I'm just going to call it a game. Many years ago, probably 8 to 10 years ago, a friend of mine were on like a Skype kind of idea. Zoom didn't really exist then. And he wants me to be his accountability partner. And we're chatting, and I said, okay, but I have one rule if we're going to do it. And he said, what? And I said, whatever I ask for, I get from you. And he's like, yeah, whatever you want. And I'm like, okay, is this on? He goes, yeah. I said, great. Give me your username and password for Netflix. And there was this pause. I kind of did it freeze. And he said, what? I'm like, I want your username and password for your Netflix account. And he said, why? And I said, I want to see what movies you watch. People seem to forget that you can go into the account and look at all the stuff that's been watched before. And he kind of hummed and hawed and said, I can't give it to you. And I'm like, and that's why we're not accountability partners anymore. What was that, like 1 minute? It was just a joke to him, right? He didn't really want to do it. Another time I was at someone's house with my family, and this guy was showing me his new laptop, MacBook Air, and I've used a program called Covenant Eyes for many years, and he put it on, he showed me, and he's kind of saying, look, I told my wife I have it running, and he, so I said, great, and I grabbed his laptop, and he goes, look, you can see the little icon in the corner, and I said, have you saved everything? And he said, yeah, and I hit restart, and I held down the Option key. And if you know Mac computers, I'm seeing if he's running something called Boot Camp. I want to know if, like, usually if you run Boot Camp, you can run Windows and Mac. And the moment I began to do it, he grabbed his laptop from me. Like, come on, but like, it's an utter joke. You're saying you want to be accountable, and you want to tell your wife that, but you're not. You have an entire operating system, and it's just a joke. Accountability is for you if you want to get better. It's not just I'm not like a porn cop, as some people would call it. So there are some really great online, this is a Covenant Eyes PDF, and this one talks about prayer, confession, and encouragement, and meeting together. And meeting together might be different in a COVID season. It might be this. And even outside of COVID, it's okay to have an accountability partner that's farther away, but I think I would encourage someone close. And then and this is kind of a bit more from my talk on media, but there is some software that you can use in your home. Accountability or Filter. Covenant Eyes is probably the leader. OpenDNS is something you run on your router, and it blocks almost all pornography coming into your home, except for Google Images and a few other things. But this is a great thing if you have kids. It blocks it from going to your PS4 or 5 if you're lucky, right? And your iPads and everything else. Meet Circle. This is from Disney, Circle by Disney. And Circle by Disney actually is a square, which makes no sense, but this is a really great product. You run it on your router, and from that you attach your kids' products, like phones or whatever. And when they do that, you can turn it off at any time. You can set parameters of what they do. Bark.us is a new player here, and I really like them. They do a lot of what do we call it? AI. So AI, it's the idea that if someone writes, let's say your kid is texting someone, and when I say kid, like if your kids just start going online and they're texting someone, and someone says, like, show me your boobs, right? Someone writes something like that. This would understand that string and send you as a parent like a notice. And so this is, like it says here, protected, school shootings prevented. Like, this is an interesting software. Now, filters are most useful in less severe cases and almost useless in severe ones, meaning if you are an outright addict, you will stop looking at internet pornography and you will head to Netflix. You give someone your Netflix password, you go to Amazon Prime, or you start finding other things on other places. Now, behaviours is also about your lifestyle. Again, there's many, like I love the idea of it's almost like a rubric. There's all these conversations. And my new talk for men, Men Navigating Everything. And if you ever could use me for a church or men's group, let me know. But we go through 8 different things. One of them is sex, but there's 8 things we got to look at. Anyways, back to this. Behaviours, lifestyle. And growing up, one of my pastors, a guy named Wayne Sainer, used to always talk about HALT, hungry, alone. And I actually think it's hungry, angry, lonely, tired, but the truth is alone also works. And I agree with this. I think that's when you're most tempted. Now, as someone who travels for a living, that's kind of a lot of my life. And there's also many other things it could be as well, right? It's not just those 4 things. And as we're talking about lifestyle, this is one thing I heard a lot growing up, the 3-second rule. And alert, avert, affirm, a lot of these weird things about bouncing your eyes, all of these things I probably disagree with today. One of the best conversations was from, I think he was a psychologist, in a movie called, if you go to YouTube and just search Heart of the Matter movie, full documentary, you will be able to see this full presentation. But in it, he says this: finding someone attractive is just normal and it's natural. So just say to yourself, that's natural, and move on to something else. He talks about when you like bounce your eyes or avert your eyes, how this base part of your brain kicks in. It's like if you tell someone no, they want to say yes. And so as opposed to kind of, no, I can't do it, and then you sort of want to do it, just, oh, that person's attractive, and move on to something else. It's really simple, but I really like it. So I think it's the last part of behaviors is your environment. And there's a whole bunch of things here. Your computer desk, this is my desk. You can see if I go back to this view, this is literally my computer desk in my office. But what I would say here is if addiction becomes habitual, you play hockey and you go downstairs and turn on something you shouldn't, or you sit down at your computer and you look at things. Some people just switch their computer to facing a different direction. Not a huge amount of success, but it could be something. How about changing the room that you are in? I was talking many years ago to a young girl in university. And by the way, I didn't tell you, I have my wife's name is Dawn, and I have 2 kids. My daughter Zoe's in first year university at Western. She's actually at Western, and my son's in grade 12. But this girl was in University of Toronto, and she was struggling with porn. All her roommates had night classes. She had day classes. So what would happen is at nighttime, she would just sit and look at porn all night. What I found fascinating about this story was a few things. One, pastor's daughter, so grew up in a faith-based home, a whole room full, all her friends were Christians who owned this house or rented this house, and it was a girl who struggled, not a guy. And so we just chatted a bit about, where does she study and what does she do? And she said she studies from home. And I said, do you struggle when you're in large groups? And she said, no. And so I said, well, Robarts Library, which is this massive library at U of T. And I said, go study in the biggest room with the most people. And here's what they decided, her and her friends. She explained her struggle to them. And so at night when they went to class, she went with them. And one of them walked her to the library. And then one of them picked her up on the way home. And she had a bit of dinner and she studied in the library every night. I'm like, talk about community. Less time alone, and this is a big one. And I think we need to make sure that we are, it's good to be working. Even my son has a job he does, and during COVID, he's actually doing it almost every night. Be careful the music we put into ourselves. The TV will come back to that, even thoughts and fantasy. John Piper once said this. This is kind of the TV conversation. There's a lot of sexuality today. And John said this. He was asked if you watched the show Game of Thrones, which is now finished. I think there's a spin-off coming. The closer I get to death and meeting Jesus personally face-to-face and giving account for my life and for the careless words that I've spoken, the more sure I am of my resolve never intentionally to look at a television show or a movie or a website or a magazine where I know I will see photos or films of nudity. Never. That's my resolve, and the closer I get to death, the better I feel about that and the more committed I become. What an interesting statement. How many of us watch movies and know there's things inside it? How many of us are willing to just say no? Dr. Stanton Peele says, relapse is not an unfortunate event that happens to you. It's a series of bad choices that you make. And I would agree with that. So beyond you is our last section. And so we've kind of looked at a bit of, I think we need to look at theologically building up our faith and growing our spiritual disciplines and also our physical disciplines. We need to look at addiction and look at counseling and dealing with addiction and trauma. Counseling is what you need if you're an addict, a sex therapist. And I have a number of friends who do this for a living if you're interested, and I can get you in touch. One of my friends, Paul, we actually interviewed on a few different YouTube videos that are on this site as well. So beyond you, one would be the objectification of women. Success in fighting porn happens, this is from a male perspective, when a guy looks away from porn not because of shame, but when they have such a high value of women that it's nearly impossible to get an arousal from her exploitation. Interesting, the hashtag #MeToo movement and the hashtag #ChurchToo movement has been a real reckoning in a lot of these areas, but I do think we need to look at objectification today. It's one thing that's kind of lost, I think, in the Me Too movement. Sarah Doubledam talked about how 80% of women felt bad about themselves when they look in a mirror. This is not okay. Society says you're not enough. And in our addiction to porn, we as men, therefore, agree with that. And I would just say we have to change this view. We have to, question, and even looking at the idea of how social media, especially for young women, right, we're looking at certain people and how it creates body image issues. And dating. In this article, young people have described to us again and again that pornography is shaping their sexual imaginations, expectations, and practices. We've had young men who have been genuinely surprised that when they enact what they see in porn, their partner doesn't like what they were doing because they've always seen women enjoying it on the screen. This is a scary but a true conversation. This one says, but how will young women find these sensual, slow burn experiences? I like that idea. Sensual, slow burn experiences. This is the idea of dating. In men indoctrinated by pornography. And the underlined part, they don't know the language of face-to-face contact. Constant arousal, change, novelty, and excitement makes them out of sync with slow developing relationships. Relationships which build slowly. Yes, women struggle, but the men who struggle are having these huge issues that we're seeing here. And they don't know the language of face-to-face contact is a big deal. Gail Dines said, when you think that porn is the major form of sex education, think what's going to happen in the next generation of boys, most of whom have been brought up on hardcore mainstream internet porn. And no one has said to him, and I would also say to her, this is not who you are. Again, will we stand up as the church and actually educate our kids and our youth groups and educate our parents on how to have healthy conversations around sex and sexuality? We have to dive into these conversations. And in dating, you must address these things. Yes, people might have been struggling, but are they striving to be a good person? Asking, what has your experience been with porn? What have you done to overcome it? And this idea of not keeping secrets. Justice is another interesting one in Beyond Us. 90% of porn videos contain physical or verbal aggression. There's so much violence, and you even hear on the daily news the amount of abuse that happens. And again, this is happening in our church world as well, and we need to address it. And parents, this world was not created by our children today. It was created by and allowed to be created by us, by our silence, our inaction, and our apathy. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who once said, we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and the actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. We need to stop being silent, whether it's embarrassment, whether it's fear, and begin to address these things. Now, parents, and I would encourage you to look at some of the materials I have on parenting, but these are a couple of great books to begin this kind of lifelong progression of parenting. When I say lifelong, I'm going to go back to this progression of parenting, right? How I parent my 19-year-old daughter tomorrow is different than how you'd parent a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. But Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior, like for young kids, just talking about body parts and safety, right? These are important conversations. There are some online, I would say Covenant Eyes, again, I really like. They have some wonderful PDFs on protecting your family and other things. In Philippians, they say that you might, and this is kind of the last Beyond You one, just the idea of our witness to the world around us, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, amongst whom you shine as lights of the world. And I have one other verse here I usually like, 2 Corinthians 5:20, therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. So what do we do from here? As we begin to leave the porn conversation, we've talked about what to do, but where do we go from here? And I would say there's a whole bunch of things. First off, we need to decide that we're dead to porn and we're done to this. You may fall, but you fall down, we get up. We need to kind of make a decision and then work through that we're not going to do it. Putting barriers around us, big barriers. Now, the barriers are going to be different for different people, but whatever it is, big barriers in your life, whether it's accountability software and other accountability people, daily faith, and this is what we do well at the church. We talk about our faith and growing our faith. Again, Christianity is a daily, strategic, intentional pursuit. YouTube, please use YouTube. You're on YouTube right now, and I did it intentionally, all these things live on YouTube. I don't think we as the church use YouTube as well as we should. There's so much great content here. Online PDFs and courses, and make sure you're not doing this alone. Add to this breaking cycles, and you might need to detox, right? I remember how old was I? I left high school. I lived in the rainforest of Belize for a year, and then I came home. And it was interesting. It's like when you're kind of out of something and you come back into it. I was just surprised at the casual language and the casual sexual comments and the TV that we watched. Again, breaking addiction, and that's a rough picture. I just kind of like the fight, and it is a battle to break addiction, but it can be done. But it's going to take vulnerability and honesty. And again, I would say you need to go see a sex addiction counselor. Set up accountability in your life and get counseling. Counseling, now I'm talking registered, licensed counselors, right? Not just a buddy, and I would say not a pastor who just talks on this, like a registered person to walk through this. Counseling's been wonderful for my mental health. Counseling is great for these conversations, also good for your marriage, anything else. Books, I'm going to give you a whole slew of different books. There's some really great ones that you can do. Grow your spiritual health, grow your personal health. Parents, I beg you to parent, right? Our kids, what is it Frederick Douglass said, the abolitionist, talked about, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Like, think through that. Like, let us do that upstream conversation and teach kids, make good decisions. This is a battle, and anything else you think that we should add in, you can let me know this later. If there's anything, I say to every talk, I say them with open hands. If there's something I'm missing, let me know. I get a chance to speak these things over and over. Here are 7 books: Sexual Detox, Surfing for God, Michael John, Clean, Douglas Weiss has a lot of really great info. Your Brain on Porn, we talked about Gary Wilson and a few others. And I would highly encourage you to buy a copy of Sheila's The Great Sex Rescue. As a side note, again, these are all listed for you here. So I got accepted recently to the Amazon, I don't like the term, but it's called the Amazon Influencer Program. It means that on this Amazon link on the bottom, every single topic I speak on, you will find one called, I think it's called Sex and Pornography, or I've split up Sex and Porn, I can't remember. But if you click on it, every single book I've gone through tonight is there with direct links. And as a side note, those are affiliate links, meaning if you end up buying a book, I think it's 1% comes back to the work that I do with the charity, which is always help. Thank you for that. I do have 4 books on my own, 2 on media, faith, culture, 2 on mental health. Your Story, The Wounding Embrace, I wrote with a pastor, Adam Clark in Toronto, and Dr. Mary Lynn. She's a psychologist. This was written before my breakdown, and so it's good information, but it's not the body, mind, soul analogy. My Reset book is free off my website, which is just my name, brettallman.com. If you go to it, my website, I'll click on in a second. But this is my breakdown put in book form. And then some friends and family wrote their journeys. Kerry Newhoff, some of you might know, wrote his journey with burnout, and other people wrote theirs. Now, my newest book is actually a beast of a book. It's actually a 226,000 word handbook on parenting. Now, the first 6 chapters are literal parenting. It's the parenting, navigating everything talk. If you look at the chapters there, parenting styles, progression, time, communication, discipline. But the last 10 chapters are all the other main things I speak on, and they're also okay to be read by a teenager, meaning I wanted to write them in not have 2 books, but just one. So this is actually 4 books in one, 660 citations, but some of the chapters, there's one on pornography, one in sexuality, and one on dating. I always call those the trifecta. I think each of those things affect each other. You can find this on Amazon. You can find it off my website. I do have these talks. This is on YouTube. All of these are being put on again on YouTube, but you can find them online. My website, which is just my name, brettallman.com, you'll find my blog. If you click on blog, there are, I think it's about 1,000. Now, they're not my blogs. I curate some of the best content I can find and just post it for you. So whether it's the marbles jar analogy for parents or other kind of conversations, but if you click sex and porn, it sounds creepy. It's not. It's just any YouTube videos and books and other things that I can find. And all my YouTube's at the top. Sorry, all my social is at the top. I would encourage you, I don't know if you ever watched the documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. If you haven't, I think I would encourage you to. But the idea is not to get rid of social media, but how to make it work for you. So tonight when I'm done, I will probably go downstairs, get something to eat, and I might turn the TV on, or I might turn on my iPad. And if I do, I want rich information from leaders and authors and pastors and speakers and friends. And so I would encourage you to follow all my social media. This is what I do with every author, with every person, so that every time you're online, hopefully there's some really great, rich content. And my YouTube channel, you're already on, so I don't need to really promote this, but there are over 200 videos on this channel, and you can subscribe, and you're welcome to send these, if you're a church leader, to people in your church, kind of, ongoing just questions and answers for parents. And you might say, how long do I have to do all of the stuff we just talked about? And I would say, for the rest of your life. These things aren't just things that will help you with pornography. The conversations, the thoughts, everything else here is going to help you for everything, for the rest of your life. Nietzsche once said, for anything great to happen, there needs to be a long obedience in the same direction. Don't you love that quote? This, to have a successful, rich Christian sexual ethic, if you want to say, it's going to be a long obedience in the same direction. This is a new mindset. This is a new battle plan, your new way of life, and it will help you with all aspects of your faith. I want to end with a poem. Now, I didn't write it. I found this randomly on a Reddit forum, but I really like this. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes me a long time to get out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it's there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. And what is the goal in all of this? I walk down another street. And I might add in one where we actually warn people that there's a hole in the sidewalk and you got to be careful. If you could ever use me for a talk, I do speak full-time. I'd love to speak to your church, students, parents, a mix of both. I speak in person and hybrid. These days, like in-person, hybrid, or digital, it's all the same to me. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. 2 weeks from now, I'll be doing my talk, Dating for Life, the Questions, which is really great for students, but also to look at how we educate and talk to our kids about dating. Hopefully tonight's given you some thoughts and tips around the conversation of pornography. Thanks for joining me.